Hey guys, this is Justin Strawn from ForWhomTheCowbellTells.com. I'm glad you decided to join us today. Doing things a little bit different, doing a video instead of writing something up today. Thought I might try to change things up a little bit. The purpose of the video is because of a man by the name of Cubelic made a pretty bold statement on Twitter yesterday. If you aren't familiar with who Cole Cubelic is, he is a former Auburn football player. He played for the Tigers back in the late 90s, early part of this century. He is a current broadcaster for the SEC Network. He hosts a daily sports talk show in the state of Alabama that covers mostly Alabama and Auburn. They obviously cover other things as well, but that seems to be his focus. So decided to go ahead and do a video on this. He created the firestorm because he was doing a little Q&A session on Twitter yesterday. Somebody asked him a question about the Iron Bowl. The question that was asked was what he thought the records of both teams would be when they went into Thanksgiving weekend to take on each other in the Iron Bowl. He said he thought both teams would come in at 9-2. Now, when somebody says that Alabama is going to have 2 losses, that obviously makes people curious. They want to know who they think Alabama is going to lose to. So that question was asked, and Cole Cubelic said he thought the 2 losses that the Alabama Crimson Tide were going to have were Florida State, which most people didn't think that odd, and Mississippi State, which people lost their minds over. When we saw this, Ethan Lee, our managing editor, he contacted Cole and asked him if he could talk to him about it. He could, but he had to do it like right then, and Ethan didn't have a chance to, so he asked me if I would do it. I did. Talked to Mr. Cubelic yesterday, and he did have some reasons behind this. He wasn't doing this just because he wanted to make a statement, to draw attention to himself or to his show. He actually had some reasons why he thought the Bulldogs were going to beat Alabama in November. Now, the catch to all this is he did make the disclaimer that it's February 28th. I talked to him yesterday on February 27th. We're basically 6 months away from opening kickoff for the 2017 season. Things could change. Injuries could happen. The season could unfold differently than what we think it will now. So there are reasons why he could always end up changing his mind before the game is actually played, but he did have some reasons why he thought the Bulldogs would win as of right now. So let me go ahead and get into those. Number 1 is the fact that Alabama can't win every game. Now, if you say, well, yeah, they can. They won every game last year. Well, they didn't win every game they won every game up until the national championship. If you look at the history of Nick Saban, almost every team, I think there was one. It might have been the 2012 national championship. I can't remember exactly. But most of Alabama's teams under Nick Saban, they've had a loss going into the national championship. I mean, they're going to lose a game. Typically, they lose it somewhere. Now, then he has them losing 2, so it will be a little bit of a step back. There is a case to be made that lots of teams who go to the national championship and don't win it have a hard time recovering from that, especially it happens a lot in the Super Bowl. But you can make somewhat of a case for that in college football as well. The obvious outlier to that would be Clemson. Clemson made a return to the national championship and actually won it this year. But there is a history of that. There's a disappointment, thinking things will be easy, whatever it may be, but there is somewhat of a history of teams playing a little bit disappointing after they've lost the national championship. Look at Auburn in 2014. They were okay, but they weren't great. They were 8-4. If you look at 2014, the runner-ups, Oregon in 2015, they weren't that good. I mean, they were okay, but they weren't great. So there are reasons why you could actually make this case for Alabama having a little bit of a down year in 2017. And remember, a down year would have 2 losses in the regular season. So let's keep that in consideration as well. I mean, a down year is much different for Alabama than it is most other teams. Second thing he talked about was Dan Mullen. Dan Mullen, he said, is a very good coach. He's not so prideful and he's not so stubborn that he won't admit mistakes. Now, then, if you're a Mississippi State fan, you hear me say that, and you're like, excuse me, he never admits a mistake. He never changes things. Well, he pointed to the fact that when Dan Mullen was on his show not too long ago, that he admitted that basically if Dan Mullen leaves Nick Fitzgerald in to play quarterback for the entire game against South Alabama, then they probably win that game. And if they win that game, the season might play out a little bit differently. He might have a little bit more confidence going into that LSU game, and if he has more confidence going into the LSU game, then they might end up pulling out that win. You could say that probably for maybe a couple other games as well, but that was a big deal to Dan Mullen. He admitted that he made a mistake and he was going to try to fix it. A lot of people won't do that. A lot of people don't. A lot of coaches will live or die and say that and be stubborn and try to do things their way until it kills them. Look at Les Miles. Les Miles ended up basically saying, I'm going to do things my way, the way I want to. I'm going to have this power eye running game. And if it doesn't work, then oh well. And it ended up getting him fired. He couldn't beat Alabama. I mean, he had enough talent. He had enough players on the offensive and defensive side of the football that he could make up for a flawed game plan against most teams, but he couldn't do it against Alabama, and that ultimately cost him his job. So he thinks Dan Mullen is a good coach who called some bad games against Alabama. He just kind of shrunk in the spotlight there. But he'll eventually figure it out, and this might be the year that he figures it out. Next is Nick Fitzgerald. Nick Fitzgerald, he believes, is the best college quarterback in the SEC. Now, he made the stipulation that he is college quarterback. He's probably not going to be the highest drafted if he gets drafted at all. Who knows? We'll have to see how he continues to develop. He'll have to develop more if he wants to have that chance. But he thinks that he has a chance to really be something special in this offense for Dan Mullen. Dan Mullen has done a really good job of elevating the Mississippi State program, and he's done a good job of implementing his system, and Nick Fitzgerald is the perfect quarterback for that. He is a big, fast quarterback who can run the ball and will likely get better at throwing the football as well. So we'll continue to see if he improves at the rate that maybe Dak Prescott did. That's asking a lot, but he showed a lot during his sophomore season. So we'll see. That was a big reason why he thought that the Bulldogs would have a chance in November, was because he thought that Nick Fitzgerald was the best college quarterback in the SEC. He may not end up being the best pro prospect, but he thought he was the best college quarterback in the SEC. Next, he says he hasn't seen enough from the Alabama defense, the players that are taking the place of all the guys who left the program. He says normally he sees a lot from the guys who are going to be the ones that step up the following season. He said he didn't see that in 2016. He sees a defense that is going to be vulnerable and susceptible to the type of player that Nick Fitzgerald and Aris Williams and those players are. That is a big area of concern for him. And related to that was he specifically targeted in on the edge pass rushers. He says he's got to see more from those guys. He didn't see enough from them. He doesn't think they're as explosive. He doesn't think they're going to be able to get to the quarterback as easily and as often as the players that they are replacing did. Next on the list, he said that he believed that the schedule is going to play a big part into it. And every year, Alabama plays LSU. It hasn't helped Mississippi State so far, but before Mississippi State takes on Alabama every single year, the Crimson Tide has LSU. He thinks it's going to be a little bit more of an advantage for the Bulldogs this year because, one, Alabama will be coming to Starkville, and two, the Bulldogs have UMass the week before. Instead of playing at Texas A&M, instead of playing another SEC team, even a Kentucky, I mean, they're still an SEC team, they now have to take on UMass. UMass should be a much weaker opponent for the Bulldogs next year. I don't think they're going to be any stronger than they were this year. I think they had their chance to beat the Bulldogs last season, and they didn't take advantage of it. They had the Bulldogs on the ropes a couple of times, and they couldn't put the finishing blow on them. I don't think they're going to be as challenged this year. If everything goes as according to plan, they should be able to rest some guys in the second half and get some guys healed up if they're having any nagging injuries that are affecting them as they go into that Alabama game. So that was another reason why he expected the Bulldogs to win. Next, he said Fitzgerald again. He's the type of quarterback. We talked about him being the best college quarterback, but he also is the type of quarterback that gives Alabama problems. These mobile quarterbacks who can make plays with their feet or extend plays with their feet. And the one thing that we forget about Nick Fitzgerald, because of the fact that he is such a big guy, we forget how fast he is, but he's extremely fast, and he's going to be able to get out in the open, especially if that edge pass rush and those those defensive linemen aren't quite as explosive as the players that they are replacing are. If you'll remember, last year in the 2016 game against Alabama, Mississippi State only got sacked like 3 times. He could have had a pretty good game had he not had a whole bunch of drops as well. So that could be an area where the Bulldogs end up getting a lot better if if he can get more the same type of protection or even better, which a lot of people think they will, and I think Cole Cubelic was hinting in that as well, that he believes the Bulldogs are going to have a much better offensive line than they did a year ago. If they are, then Nick Fitzgerald could have some protection. He just needs a little bit of time. He just needs a little bit of space. And if he can get that, you could see him have a big game. Like I said, he could have had a big game last year but the receivers were dropping balls left and right. So I don't know if that's going to continue to be the case. Hopefully they'll figure that problem out, but we'll have to wait and see. But Nick Fitzgerald is the type of quarterback that can give Alabama problems, and we'll see if he can do it in 2017. Another thing that he talked about, and this is probably the most important, at least in my estimation, I don't know if it was the most important to Cole Cubelic, that would be the defense. Todd Grantham is a high-risk, high-reward type defensive coordinator. He has no problem bringing pressure. He has no problem bringing lots of heat from extra positions. He honestly believes that that type of defense is going to be very successful against Alabama. Their offensive line is going to be younger than they have been in years past, and if they are struggling to block, it could be a situation where they're getting to Jalen Hurts, forcing him to throw the ball more than he would like to. Last year, the Bulldogs got no pass rush on him whatsoever, and the secondary was awful, so it was easy for Jalen Hurts, who was not an accurate passer, to pick the Bulldogs apart. If the Bulldogs are able to get pressure and get in his face like Clemson did in the national championship game, then that might end up changing. His accuracy will definitely be affected. He won't be able to stand in the pocket and just sit there and pick a defense apart. And if you put pressure on him and make him throw when he doesn't want to, that's when you can have success against Jalen Hurts. He's not the most talented quarterback out there, but he fits what basically the offense was trying to do for Alabama. Basically not make mistakes, make plays with your feet, make the easy open throw, and you'll be fine. If they can take that away, which he thinks a Todd Grantham-style defense that is high risk, high reward can do. Now, he's not predicting that Mississippi State ends up winning the SEC West. He's not predicting that they're going undefeated or anything like that. But he thinks that this is a type of a game, it's almost basically a trap game type thing. If they come out against LSU with the big win, they are riding high off the momentum of that win, then you could see an instance where the Bulldogs, who are probably coming in with 2 or 3 losses at this point, if they're going to beat them, they're going to have no more than 2 losses probably, are feeling confident. They feel like they've got the best chance, and this is the type of situation where it opens up for the Bulldogs to win. Will they do it? I don't know. I will say this. If the Bulldogs are going to pull that upset in November, I think it is going to play out the way that Cole Cubelic thinks it does. I think that's the only way that it does. I don't think you're going to see a whole lot of variance from what he was telling me, and the Bulldogs still end up winning. So I'll make my picks and stuff probably in the coming weeks about how I think the seasons for all the SEC teams will play out. But it was interesting to listen to him and to give his explanation for that, because he took a lot of heat on Twitter about this because people thought he was absolutely nuts. But like I said, he does have reasoning behind this. He does have a plan, and there's a reason why he thinks that the Bulldogs will have a chance to pull off what would be a really big upset if it should play out the way that he thinks it does. So for whomthecowbelltolls.com, I am Justin Strawn. Thanks for sticking around, and until next time, Hail State.